Hello and welcome to the podcast. This is Ron's Amazing Stories. We have stories that should thrill you a little and chill you a little.
It's amazing.
What you'll hear are adventures sent in by you guys, classic stories from the pulp mags, and episodes from the golden age of radio. We have special segments like Ghost Stories with Sylvia.
That's amazing.
And These Are Your Stories. So settle in for the next hour and enjoy the show. One more thing. You just might want to prepare yourself to be taken away from today.
Another 5-minute mystery.
This 5-minute mystery is being brought to you by The Obvious. John Scully once said, "The future belongs to those who see possibilities before they become obvious."
That's catchy.
It is, isn't it?
What's that would mean?
Yep. Today, our FMM is obvious.
Okay. Homicide Division, Inspector Nichols speaking. Who? Ralph Dean. The guy that backs all those nightclubs with his dough? Where? Right, I'll be there in 10 minutes. So you two are Thomas and Gerald Klein.
That's right, Inspector.
We're brothers.
Where's the body?
That's right, fellas. The coroner'd like to make his examination as soon as possible.
It's in this next room.
You see, we're both bachelors, and we have our living quarters here above the nightclub.
Right in here, Inspector.
Not much of a mess. Mustn't have been a struggle.
There wouldn't be much blood in a death like this. Death was too instantaneous.
As we said, Inspector, Dean came to Thomas and me and asked if he could come up here to talk over a business deal with this Johnson fellow. Dean had put up the money for his club, too, but Johnson wasn't cutting in with enough dough.
Was Dean financing your club, too?
Why, yes.
But to get back to the story, Inspector, Dean and Johnson came up here to this room. After about half an hour, Thomas and I heard 2 shots. We happened to be in the kitchen just below here.
We ran right up, but Johnson had beat it.
But not before he stopped to plant my necktie in Dean's hand to frame us. Make it look like I killed Dean.
How about that necktie in the victim's hand, Coroner?
It looked as though Dean ripped it off the neck of his killer.
See? Johnson's a smart operator. He knew it would look that way.
Can you remove the tie from his hand, Coroner?
Yes, if you want me to break his hand. It's a case of cadaveric spasm, Inspector. Dean has a death clutch on it, and the only way you'll remove it is by breaking the hand.
Johnson must have gone up into our wardrobe, grabbed one of Gerald's ties, and torn it. Then put it into Dean's hand and forced the fingers around it.
Yeah. Johnson was jealous of our business and was double-crossing Dean, so he thought this would be a way to kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
He killed Dean and planted suspicion on us.
You might as well store your alibi, boys. Johnson had nothing to do with this. Gerald, you fired the fatal shots as your brother Thomas stood by and watched. I'm arresting both of you for Dean's murder.
Do you know what evidence proves Gerald pulled the trigger? In 1 minute, we'll be back with the solution. But first...
Well, BG, a death grip is a real thing, and this story is pretty spot on. We even have the shady world of the nightclub as the backdrop. You just can't ask for any more.
Are you suggesting that these 2 guys are going to fry?
Suggesting? I guarantee it.
Who am I to argue?
That is wise, my friend.
Wrong. Sometimes you are insufferable.
But you know you love me.
Now, back to the inspector and his explanation.
Johnson couldn't have planted that necktie, Gerald. That tie of yours in Dean's hand is the clue proving your guilt. As you walked close to him and shot, he grabbed at you, caught hold of your tie, and in falling, tore the tie off. When a person dies suddenly, as did Dean, they often clutch tenaciously as to whatever happens to be in their hands. Their fingers are set in an unmovable grasp. In that case, it's a medical impossibility for anyone to place something in the victim's hand and cause that dead hand to grasp it as tightly as Dean has your tie. That clue in Dean's hand is going to be worth 2 killers in the electric chair.
Spot on wrong. You are truly amazing.
Thank you.
Amazingly brash, incompetent, and dare I say an imbecile.
That's kind of harsh.
Also, kind of true.
Well, BG, you are anal, pretentious, and dare I say, a pompous ass.
I appreciate your point of view.
I knew you would.
It's that you say.
Hello, and welcome to the podcast. On the show today, we have so much good stuff that I'm not even sure it's legal.
All right, fine. I'm gonna call the cops.
Okay, I was speaking metaphorically. What we have is legal and pretty good. We have some ghost stories from you guys, 2 classic science fiction stories, and a brand new Our Amazing Stories that looks at some astonishing women.
That does sound...
Legal? It is. And so let's get to this stuff with Stephen King's brand new audiobook. Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook and a 30-day free trial at audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Audible has sponsored the show now since July of 2019. We have reviewed more than 140 audiobooks, and the list keeps growing. Did you know that Audible has over 200,000 books available? And a lot of those are included in the free catalog. Audible is amazing, and it is the perfect companion to Ron's Amazing Stories. If you like this podcast, you're going to love Audible. So what am I listening to? Fairy Tale by Stephen King, narrated by Seth Numrich and Stephen King himself. Every once in a while in history, there's an author that comes along that is, well, special. I don't have to tell you that King is one of those. He is a legendary storyteller, and he's returned with a new tale that goes into the deepest well of his imagination. In Fairy Tale, a 17-year-old boy inherits the keys to a parallel world where good and evil are at war. And the stakes couldn't be higher for that world or ours. Charlie Reed looks like a regular high school kid, great at baseball and football, and a decent student. But he carries a pretty heavy load. His mom was killed in a hit-and-run accident when he was 10, and grief drove his dad to drink. Charlie learned how to take care of himself and his dad. When Charlie is 17, he meets a dog named Radar and her aging master, Howard Bowditch, a recluse in the house at the top of the big hill with a locked shed in the backyard. Sometimes some very strange sounds emerge from it. Charlie starts doing jobs for Mr. Bowditch and loses his heart to Radar. Then, when Bowditch dies, he leaves Charlie a cassette tape telling a story that no one would believe. What Bowditch knows, and has kept secret all his long life, is that inside that shed is a portal to another world. Our clip for today from Fairy Tale does not really give you an inkling of what this story is all about. What it does do is show you how well the story is read and what a masterful storyteller King is. I get asked all the time if I pick these promo bits each week. Truth is, I do not get to pick them. Here is a bit from very early in the book, and I think you're going to like it.
It was named the Frank Ellsworth Bridge, after a hometown hero who died in Vietnam, but the locals just called it the Sycamore Street Bridge. Sycamore Street was paved nice and smooth on both sides, but the bridge deck, 142 feet long, was steel grating that made a humming sound when cars went over it and a rumble when trucks used it, which they could do because the bridge was now rated at 60,000 pounds. Not big enough for a loaded semi, but long haulers never used Sycamore Street anyway. There was talk every year in the town council about paving the deck and adding at least one sidewalk, but every year it seemed like there were other places where the money was needed more urgently. I don't think a sidewalk would have saved my mother, but paving might have. There's no way to know, is there? We lived halfway up the long length of Sycamore Street Hill, about a quarter mile from the bridge. There was a little gas and convenience store on the other side called Zip Mart. It sold all the usual stuff, from motor oil to Wonder Bread to Little Debbie cakes, but it also sold fried chicken made by the proprietor, Mr. Eliades, known to the neighborhood as Mr. Zippy. That chicken was exactly what the sign in the window said, the best in the land. I can still remember how tasty it was, but I never ate a single piece after my mom died. I would have gagged it up if I tried. One Saturday in November of 2003, the town council still discussing paving the bridge and still deciding it could wait another year, my mother told us she was going to walk down to the Zippy and get us fried chicken for dinner. My father and I were watching a college football game. "You should take the car," Dad said. "It's going to rain." "I need the exercise," Mom said, "but I'll wear my Little Red Riding Hood raincoat." And that's what she was wearing the last time I saw her. The hood wasn't up because it wasn't raining yet, so her hair was spilling over her shoulders. I was 7 years old and thought my mother had the world's most beautiful red hair. She saw me looking at her through the window and waved. I waved back, then turned my attention to the TV, where LSU was driving. I wish I had looked longer, but I don't blame myself. You never know where the trap doors are in your life, do you? It wasn't my fault, and it wasn't Dad's fault, although I know he blamed himself. Thought, if only I'd gotten up off my dead ass and given her a ride to the damn store. It probably wasn't the fault of the man in the plumbing truck, either. The cop said he was sober, and he swore he was keeping to the speed limit, which was 25 in our residential zone. Dad said that even if that were true, the man must have taken his eyes off the road, if only for a few seconds. Dad was probably right about that. He was an insurance claims adjuster, and he told me once that the only pure accident he ever heard of was a man in Arizona who was killed when a meteor hit him in the head. "There's always someone at fault," Dad said, "which is not the same as blame." "Do you blame the man who hit Mom?" I asked. He thought about it, raised his glass to his lips, and drank. This was 6 or 8 months after Mom died, and he'd pretty much given up on beer. By then he was strictly a Gilby's man. "I try not to, and mostly I can do that unless I wake up at 2 in the morning with nobody in the bed but me. Then I blame him." Mom walked down the hill. There was a sign where the sidewalk ended. She walked past the sign and crossed the bridge. By then it was getting dark and starting to drizzle. She went into the store, and Irina Eliades, of course known as Mrs. Zippy, told her more chicken was coming out in 3 minutes, 5 at the most. Somewhere on Pine Street, not far from our house, the plumber had just finished his last job of that Saturday and was putting his toolbox in the back of his panel van. The chicken came out, hot and crispy and golden. Mrs. Zippy boxed up an 8-piece and gave Mom an extra wing to eat on her walk home.
Well, I'm pretty sure I don't have to tell you that this segment doesn't end well for Charlie's mother. King's storytelling in fairy tale soars. This is a magnificent and terrifying tale in which good is pitted against overwhelming evil, and a heroic boy and his dog must lead the battle. Early in the pandemic, King asked himself this question: what could you write that would make you happy. As if my imagination had been waiting for the question to be asked, I saw a vast deserted city. Deserted but alive. I saw the empty streets, the haunted buildings, a gargoyle head lying overturned in the street. I saw smashed statues of what I didn't know, but eventually found out. I saw a huge, sprawling palace with glass towers so high that their tips pierced the clouds. Those images released the story I wanted to tell. Well, the result of that question that Stephen asked himself gave us a fairy tale. Now, if that appeals to you in any way, head to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories, and you can have Fairy Tale by Stephen King for free. Here's what Audible has set up for us. They are offering a free audiobook in 30 days to give you the opportunity to check out their service. This also gains you access to the included catalog, which is updated constantly with new titles. So, to download your free audiobook today, go to audibletrial.com/Ron's Amazing Stories. Thank you, Audible. And now, it's time for your stories.
These are your stories, sent by you, for you.
This time we take on a trio of short stories. It's been my experience that the short tale can be some of the most bone-chilling of their kind. I think the reason for this is that they force you to fill in the gaps. What we fill them in with may be and is probably worse than the truth. Our first story comes from New Jersey. It was sent in via the web submission page by Stanley Turquoise, and he has titled it Midnight Shuffles. I was staying at my partner's house. She had just come out of an abusive relationship. She was moving out of her house, and there were a few boxes in the bedroom. She had a 6-year-old boy who was in the house with us, sleeping in his own room. I woke up during the dark early hours of the morning and heard him shuffling about at the bottom of the bed. I kept my head slightly under the covers and my eyes shut. To be honest, I didn't want to deal with the 6-year-old, and I was hoping he'd wake his mom up. After 3 or 4 minutes, I started to think this wasn't him, because he hadn't tried waking either of us up. He was just moving around the room. Then I panicked. It's the ex, I thought. I started to worry about all of us at this point. Then I heard the footstep I had been listening to suddenly stomp and rush up to the side of the bed where my partner was. That was enough for me. I jumped up, yelled as I flicked the bed lights on, expecting a confrontation. However, there was no one there. No son, no ex. In the next few seconds, both myself and my now-awake girlfriend heard more footsteps, almost running. They pass us down towards the pile of boxes. To top the experience off, the boxes where the footsteps had suddenly stopped began to rock, as if somebody had run straight into them. I have no explanation for what happened, and my girlfriend had never experienced anything in the house before. Stanley Turquoise, New Jersey. Wow, that is an amazing experience and not your typical ghost behavior. I don't know how to begin to explain it, but I think your yell might have been the key to its abrupt ending. Thank you, Stan, for sharing your story. This next one is an update to a story that we had some time ago. I have not found the exact episode yet, but I will post it in the show notes when I track it down. It comes from Brandon Frakes from Walla Walla, Washington. He has titled it, More from Nana. Hey Ron, I've previously sent in a story to the RAS about my fiancée and her mother's encounter with what we think was the spirit of her dying grandmother. I don't remember when or what episode it was on, but it's worth a listen. Because it's a long tale to fully rehash here, long story short, they heard a woman's voice call out their names while no one was around. It occurred about 4 days into Nana becoming unresponsive. Cut to today. I was helping my soon-to-be grandpa-in-law with computer stuff, and he tells me that one of his new caretakers, since Nana has passed away, heard a woman's voice behind her in the kitchen telling her to take care of Pop-Pop because he's a good man. Neither I nor my fiancée nor my future mother-in-law recounted our experiences to either Pop-Pop or his caretaker, Olivia. He also said that she had recently suffered a death in her family as her estranged brother had passed unexpectedly, which makes me feel like the door between life and death tends to stay propped open for better or worse when life ends, at least for the people in mourning. Brandon Frakes, Walla Walla, Washington. Well, Brandon, I remember that story quite well. It is a creepy tale that, if I remember right, ended with an apparition floating towards the window after Nana's final breath. I want to thank you for the update, and I couldn't agree with you more that the veil gets mighty thin with the passing of a loved one. Our last story comes from Misty Lane. Yes, folks, that's her real name. And she lives in Round Top, Texas. She has titled her story, Haunted BK. So about a year ago, I moved with a friend to get away from some family drama. It took me a week to get a job working as a cashier at a Burger King across town. Round Top is a small farming community, and I don't have a car, so I took my bike to work. Soon after starting there, I got promoted to closing manager. I worked there about a month, and I never saw anything weird, except that I would think I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and I always felt uneasy whenever I would lock up. So one night I'm on the phone with my friend as I'm locking up. We're talking about random crap like the newest death battle or the newest episode of Soul Anime. Anyway, as I'm turning off the lights, I turn to head out the door that leads into the main lobby of the building. But, for whatever reason, every single night I always forget to put away the wet floor signs by the bathroom doors after I clean them. That is when I notice that the men's bathroom door is slightly open. Now, these doors are spring-loaded, so they should shut themselves. At this point, I'm still on the phone with my friend, but I had stopped talking mid-sentence once I saw the door. I took a step towards it, feeling a little creeped out, but before I could even reach my hand out to the door, suddenly it shut itself. Now this has me thinking that there must be someone still in the bathroom. So I shout out that it's closing time and they have to come out. Nothing happened. I decided to go in and check. I walk in, and as plain as day is a tall, dark blob, roughly in the shape of a man. It turns towards me and then runs right through me. Chill I felt was like nothing I had ever felt before. Needless to say, I quickly ran out of the building, forgetting to set the alarm, and while my friend was trying to figure out why, I went silent. I rode to my parents' house, and we worked out the troubles we were having. The next day, I did get into trouble for not setting the alarm. I told my boss what happened, quit that very moment, and moved back home. Misty Lane, Round Top, Texas. Well, Misty, that is a great story, and for the record, I think I would have quit too. Thank you for sharing it. It puts a whole new perspective on Burger King. Well, that's it for this time. If you have a story that you want to share, like Misty did, head to the main website at ronsamazingstories.com. Click on the story submission banner, leave your story, give it a title, and please tell me where you're from. I'll read it if I can. Our featured story this week is a strange tale that first appeared in Science Fiction Adventures magazine in February of 1953. What we see is not always what there is to see. Sober or drunk, Johnny was seeing things, like spiderwebs in the night sky. But as a newspaper reporter, Bennet had the job of keeping facts and fantasies separate. And he was good at that. Maybe too good. The story is titled Come Into My Parlor and was written by Charles E. Fritch. It is read for us by the Librivox veteran, Dale Grothmann.
I found Johnny a few blocks from our hotel in a little bar that was nearly deserted. He was sitting alone at a table in a dark corner, staring morosely at nothing in particular, his hand limp around an almost empty glass. He seemed perfectly sober, though his eyes stared glassily ahead. I sat down beside him. "What do you say we go back to the hotel, Johnny? Tomorrow's another slave day." His eyes shifted to me, and then back to nothing. I wonder if he had actually seen me. "We can talk about it over some coffee and a bit to eat," I suggested, placing my hand on his arm. "Go to hell," he said quietly, and shook me loose. He lifted his glass, drained the last few drops. He held the empty glass to the light, then set it down regretfully. "But first, buy me a drink." "You'd better go home," I said. "You've had enough." He laughed harshly. "Look who's given me orders. I know things about this cockeyed old world you never had nightmares about, and you're ordering me around. Bossy newspaper man? Go to hell then. I'll get my own drink." He rose unsteadily and managed his way to the bar. He came back with a glassful. "You still here? I thought I told you." "You'd better lay off that stuff," I said quietly. "You're not used to it." "Boy, oh boy. You're just full of orders today, aren't you? Charlie Bennet, boy crusader. Well, I've got something you can crusade about. Anything else you'd like?" "That's enough for now." "You're damn right it is. Now get the hell out of here and leave me alone. Can't you see I'm brooding over the fate of the world? What are you so mad about?" He looked annoyed and a little startled. "Brother, if you only knew—" He raised his glass, then stopped and set it on the table. "Wait a minute. Maybe I ought to tell you. Maybe I ought to let the two of us worry about it instead of just me. Maybe you should print it in that newspaper of yours." "I'm willing to listen anyway." "Sure, why not? I'm just beginning to experience the rosy sensation, that warm feeling of camaraderie they keep stopped up in bottles. It's the only place on this planet you can find it. Don't be cynical. Maybe I should burst out laughing. The whole thing's really funny. It's the funniest thing I've ever heard." "We better go." "Sure, let's go. But first, you want to see something really funny? Here." He took a pair of glasses from his pocket and handed them to me. They seemed like ordinary shell-rimmed glasses, though the lenses were tinted a slight blue. "Put 'em on," he prompted. "Go ahead." "Where'd you get these?" "Made 'em," he said. "My job is optical research, remember? I wasn't fooling around in the lab with some invisible light elements. The right combination of lenses and coatings and whammo! This!" He took a drink. "I should have been a lawyer or a plumber or something." He grunted. "Or even a newspaper man." "What are they supposed to do? See in the dark?" He laughed humorlessly. "That'd be a boon for a reporter, wouldn't it? No, my friend, much worse than that. Try 'em on. Go ahead." I did. "Well?" "Notice anything peculiar?" "The coating makes everything seem bluish, maybe even unearthly, if that's what you want. But—" "Come on outside, then," he said. This time he took my arm and steered me from the bar. I was glad of the opportunity to get him into the night air. "Look at the sky," he directed. "See anything unusual?" He stood waiting, expectant. "I see stars," I said. "Nothing unusual about that, is there?" "Stars? Only stars?" His voice had lost its tinge of sarcasm. His fingers were tightening on my arm. "Look across the sky. See those luminous bands? All across the sky, like a giant spider web?" I looked again. After a while I said, "Sorry, Johnny, but there aren't any luminous bands, spider webs or otherwise. I think we'd better get into the room. Good night's rest." "Wait a minute," he cried suddenly, his face pale. "You think I'm drunk. Or worse. I tell you there is something up there. Shining streamers crisscrossing the sky. Like... There's nothing, Johnny, only stars." I took the glasses off. He made a quick grab for them, and somehow they fell on the pavement and shattered. For a moment, Johnny stared at the glittering fragments, his jaw working. "You've broken them," he accused finally. His eyes filled more with sudden despair than hatred. "It took weeks to build them." "It was an accident," I told him. "But it's just as well they are broken. I tell you, Johnny, there's nothing unusual in the sky. Nothing at all. Spider webs? Next you'll be seeing pink elephants." Johnny stood in the cool night and stared at the sky. "They're up there, I tell you. They're up there, and I want to know why. And there's one thing I want to know more than anything else. Suppose they're really spiders' webs." His face was deathly white. "Are there spiders?" He stared at me insanely in the darkness. "Do you realize what that would mean, Charlie? Giant spiders, invisible, roaming across the earth?" His fingers were digging into my arm again. "Johnny, come out of it," I snapped, shaking him. "There's no web in the sky, you hear me? And there aren't any spiders either. It's just some crazy figment of your imagination, that's all." "But just suppose there are," he persisted a little wildly. Maybe it's not just the glasses. Maybe it's partly me, too. Maybe I'm the only one who can see them. Maybe that's why you don't see the web. Maybe—" "Johnny, be sensible. If there were such monsters roaming around, don't you think they'd have been discovered by now?" "I don't know," he said helplessly. "I don't know, and it's driving me crazy. You're probably wondering why I haven't slept very well for the past couple of weeks. Well, that's the reason. I didn't want to say anything. I hardly dared put the glasses on, I was so afraid. Not of being thought crazy, but afraid of what they might do if they were discovered." Look, Johnny, even supposing you might be right, why wouldn't they show themselves? Why just stay in the sky in a large web? Maybe they're sizing us up, Johnny said, trembling, but not with cold. After all, we've got a few weapons, too. Maybe a machine gun or atomic bomb would hurt them, as well as humans. Unless they're there for some good, I suggested. Johnny laughed. Spiders? Maybe they're hungry, and they think we're a bunch of flies down here. That's more likely. Isn't this rather fantastic? Of course it is. Why do you suppose I've been keeping quiet about it for the past 2 weeks? Why do you suppose I'm out trying to get drunk? He added disgustedly. I can't even do that. Come on, I said. Let's go to the room and we'll have some coffee. We can talk about it there. Sure, he said. His voice was suddenly subdued. Sure, why not? We went to the hotel room and I made some coffee, being careful to slip enough sleeping tablets into Johnny's cup. In a few minutes, he was sprawling across the bed. I went to the window and looked at the glowing beads of traffic below. I looked at the sky, at the stars. Spiders in the sky. What a story that would be! The editor'd slap me in the booby hatch if I ever handed in a who's, what, when, where like that. When I left for work the next morning, Johnny was still snoozing. Let him sleep it off. Do him good. He'd been working too hard at the lab anyhow. I couldn't get back to the hotel room that morning, though I wanted to see if Johnny was okay. I was pretty busy writing a human interest yarn, kidding the pants off some astronomer's notion that light waves coming from certain portions of the sky were being deflected or refracted slightly for no discernible reason. The amount of difference was microscopic, and I wrote it up to emphasize its ridiculous splitting of hairs and the fact that you can't take some of these crackpots seriously. Here the world is on the verge of coming apart at the seams, and they worry about wayward light rays. During the afternoon, I managed to drop into the hotel to see if Johnny had slept off the liquor and the sleeping tablets. He had, and he was sitting on the edge of the bed, looking grim, and a little perplexed. "How you feeling, Johnny?" I said. "Great," he said, though he didn't sound it. "Things seem a lot clearer this morning." "Good. I thought they would. You know, you really had me going last night. I thought you meant all that stuff, but I guess imagination and a few beers can do a lot." "Cut the kidding," he said grimly. "What?" "I said cut it. I'm not in the mood." "Now what's the matter?" "This," he said. He held up a pair of glasses twin to those destroyed. "But how could you have made another set? You haven't been near the lab today." "When I first discovered this web business, I made 2 pair of glasses. I figured 2 people could do something about it a whole lot easier than just one. But I was afraid to let anyone in on it. I thought maybe I was batty. So I made this pair for you, Charlie, so that you could write the stuff up in your paper and let people know. That's a laugh, isn't it?" "Say, that's swell, but—" "Stand back," Johnny cried suddenly as I started to move toward him. He snatched a gun from beneath the pillow and waved it threateningly. "Know what I was going to do this afternoon before you came in?" "Johnny, this is crazy. Put down that gun and listen to reason." "I had the glasses on," he continued, "and I was looking out the window there. I was getting real brave, even in broad daylight. But there comes a time when you just don't care. I saw spiders in the street, huge spiders, walking along the street. mingling with human beings. And get this, Charlie, when I took the glasses off, they were like human beings. Like human beings, you understand? You know what that means? They're in disguise all around us. That's not true, Johnny, I insisted. There are no webs in the sky. There are no spiders. It's your imagination. The strain. Working in the lab. No, he cried, and the gun never wavered. You know what else I saw? A few minutes ago, I was looking down in the street, and a spider got out of a car just in front of the hotel here and started coming in. I took off the glasses to see if it might be someone I knew. He began to laugh hysterically. You know who it was, Charlie? I leapt forward and tried to knock the gun down, but Johnny's hand came up, and the gun jumped, spurting noise and flame. The bullet slammed into my body. Desperately, I drove forward. My arms went around him. The gun went off again before I could prevent it. A furrow of pain shot across my stomach, and I shrieked out in sudden anguish. Johnny! Johnny, stop it! Stop! I struck his hand. The gun clattered to the floor. He was struggling frantically, striking out against me with doubled fists. His shirt was splattered with my blood. He gasped, clearing his lungs for a scream. There was nothing else I could do. The life was draining from me. I held his arms and legs together, tried not to look into the terrified expression crossing his face. I held him tightly while he squirmed in helpless frustration. And with my two remaining arms, I strangled him.
I thought that story was tangled in a web of deceit. See how I did that? It was suggested by Darren Meisner of Norfolk, Virginia. He told me that he fears spiders, and this one really gave him the creeps. And I can see why. The story, in a different form, was made into a Twilight Zone episode. It was written by Charles E. Finch, who was the author of our story. Probably not a coincidence. He wrote and edited fantasy, science fiction, and horror. He was the editor of Mike Shane Mystery Magazine from 1979 until 1985. His short story Misfortune Cookie was also adapted for an episode of The Twilight Zone. Fritch was born in Utica, New York. Beginning at age 10, he wanted to become a science fiction writer and kept notes for story ideas in a notebook. He served during World War II as a paratrooper and later graduated from New York State's Syracuse University with a degree in English and a minor in psychology. The later, he claimed, was so that he could get inside the heads of his characters. He made use of his wife Shirley, who was reported to bear a very good resemblance to Elizabeth Taylor, to prank acquaintances by having her make a grand entrance. You know, that sounds like fun. Yes, it is Our Amazing Stories. But just what does that mean? We have segments for your stories, one for strange moments in history, and even one that plays clips from the golden age of radio to take us back in time. So what makes this segment different? Our Amazing Stories looks at people who did amazing things. So sit back and listen to this incredible tale. This time, we're not going to just look at one story. We're going to look at several people who did some amazing things that you probably never heard of. Like the story of Edith Wilson. You say you've not heard of her? But she was actually president of the United States for about a year. In the recent past, we've missed out on America getting its first female president. What most people don't realize is that we already basically had one. On the evening of September 25, 1919, Edith Wilson, wife of President Woodrow Wilson, found her husband on the floor in the middle of a stroke. He was completely bedridden, unable to take meetings or attend to his daily duties. Unwilling to hand the presidency over to Wilson's vice president, Thomas Marshall, Edith decided that she would serve as proxy for the president until he was well enough to resume his duties. How about that? Have you ever heard of Hedy Lamarr? She may have gotten her start as an actress, but her real legacy is much more important. After she immigrated to the United States from Austria, Lamarr devoted her life to science, working to create something called spread spectrum technology. Now, you might be asking yourself, what is that? Well, believe it or not, it is the precursor to modern-day Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. At the beginning of World War II, she and composer George Antheil developed a radio guidance system for Allied torpedoes. It used their frequency hopping technology to defeat the threat of jamming torpedoes by the Axis powers. Amazing. Okay, now let's move on to something a little more dangerous. Annie Edison Taylor was a teacher who, in 1901, on her 63rd birthday, became the first woman to survive a trip over Niagara Falls in a barrel. After she was fished out of the water, she told reporters that she would caution anyone against attempting the feat. Why did she do this? Well, by 1900, Taylor had fallen on some pretty hard times. She had been burned out of her home and lost most of her money invested with a local clergyman. She performed the stunt to make some fast cash. Our last story comes from the Revolutionary War. We've all heard of the late-night ride of Paul Revere. But there's more to that story that often gets missed, and that's the ride of Sybil Ludington. Who is that, you might ask? She rode with Revere to alert townspeople to the arrival of British forces. Often left out of the Revere story, Sybil rode twice as far as Revere and did it riding side saddle. According to the story told decades later, the then 16-year-old rode 40 miles from her hometown in Fredericksburg, New York, to rally approximately 400 militiamen under the command of her father, Colonel Henry Ludington. Troops from New York and Connecticut rallied to engage the British the next day in the Battle of Richfield. A brief mention of the ride was published by her great-grandchildren in 1907. Now, thanks to great record-keeping, historical documents, and word of mouth, there are interesting people from history that everyone knows about, like Galileo, Thomas Jefferson, Rosa Parks, or how about Henry Ford? Most inventors, dignitaries, and social activists make a lasting impression on history. Their names make it into textbooks, classes, and eventually even become household names. They become so well known that when someone asks, who's the most interesting person in the world? There's a chance that one of those names is the answer. However, there are some very interesting people who did amazing things and somehow never get remembered for them. Sometimes they were simply doing the right thing at the wrong time. Sometimes the fact that they were never credited was purely a mistake, or there was no one around to see their accomplishment. Well, that's it for this edition of Our Amazing Stories. I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any ideas for stories for this segment, or want to write one of your own, please let me know. I would love to work with you on the project, and I want to hear any ideas you might have. Just use the contact page on the main website, and we'll get it done. Thank you for listening to Our Amazing Stories.
Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Delicious things to eat.
The popcorn can't be beat. The sparkling drinks are just dandy. The chocolate bars and the candy. So let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
As read by Amazing Stories, read by amazing people.
This time on As Read By, we have another science fiction short story. This one appeared in Imagination Stories of Science and Fantasy, May of 1952. It is titled Survivors and was written by Arthur Decker Savage. It is read for us again by our good friend Dale Grothmann.
Olaf! Bowron! They recognized each other simultaneously, there in the thin fringe of tangled brush skirting the hidden lake. Olaf, it's good to see you again. I thought there was nothing but mountains, wolves, and wild ones between me and civilization. They picked their way slowly toward the shore together. Olaf dropped gratefully to the warm sand. The sunset highlighted his reddish hair. You're not far wrong. There is wolf spoor back there on the North Ridge. But what in the name of the moon are you doing so far from New York? Headed south to stay, Bowron said. He scanned the brush and trees behind them cautiously, then stretched out beside his companion, sighing. I'm getting too old for the winters, and the canned food in the ruins are getting scarcer every year. Olaf looked at him in disbelief. You're traveling alone? Aren't you? The retort was sharp, with a keen edge of elderly pride. Something like a weary chuckle sounded deep in Olaf's throat. He spoke with easy candor. Yes, but look, Bowron, I'm a hunter by choice. And I'm big and in my prime. I can run half a day at top speed, and I'm not too bad in a free-for-all. You're a teacher, wise, but not in the ways of the wild. Your senses are dulled, and your reactions slow, like all city folk. Bowron's eyes looked suddenly tired, older. He gazed out over the placid water. I could persuade no one to accompany me, he said simply. You made a good choice, Olaf, to terminate your education and seek the freedom of the wilds, the natural life that I think all must someday embrace. He sighed deeply. Of course, there is the dream of achievement that the city dwellers entertain. We've grown soft in our dependence upon the buried food in the rubble, spending our time in study of the books and other god things, always hoping that we can understand and duplicate the old civilization. But our best thinkers, since they are the most eager searchers, stumble most often into the hidden pockets of radioactivity that endure even yet, and they die, and their knowledge dies with them, and our dreams and aspirations become dimmer with each generation. Olaf grunted, and Bowron went on as though to himself. I've come to believe that it's useless to follow in the footsteps of the gods, that we must wait and think and work each in his own way until we learn what is possible for us through our own trials and the further development of our simple tools. We've learned much from the god things, slowly, over the years, but we also know that we're mutants, changed by the radiation of the great war areas, breeding true at last, and that we are different from the wild ones. True, we're superior, but we're not gods. Whether we can ever... Olaf had spun to his feet and was gone with incredible speed. Bowron sat up tensely, listening to the crashing of the brush, and finally to the shrill squeal of departing life. He relaxed and waited until Olaf, grinning, returned with a rabbit. "Our dinner, old-timer. Sorry I wasn't listening too closely to what you were saying." Later, after they had eaten and were stretched comfortably on the moon-drenched shore, Olaf grew reminiscent. "I remember your teachings, Bowron, and I recall well our endless attempts to operate the god things, the machines and the mechanisms. But all that always seemed strange. Best of all, I like the tales of the old days, the stories of our ancestors." Bowron nodded thoughtfully. "It was that way with most of my pupils. It was more comfortable to dream of the past than to cope with the current hardships. It seemed to arouse some dormant instinct in all of us." He broke off and sighed. "Would you like to hear another of the stories?" "Very much." Bowron studied the bright moon. "Well, once, in the far and long ago, there was a man named Smith who lived in a big city." When the tale was done, Olaf seemed deeply moved. "I believe," he said slowly, "that I'll go with you to the Southland. You might easily perish on the way, and such words as yours must live to give others comfort and hope. For we may yet find living gods in some remote corner of the world. It must have been wonderful," he mused sleepily, "to have lived in the companionship with the gods, with men." He curled up comfortably, paws tucked in, and laid his nose across his bushy tail.
Often in post-apocalyptic stories, we are presented with what happens when we survive. Did you catch one of the clues in this one? Like canned food? I thought that was pretty interesting. When man finally embarks on the final atomic war, his civilization may be destroyed, yet there will be survivors. Would you want to be one of them? That was episode number 559, and Stanley Turquoise, Brandon Frakes, Misty Lane, and Darren Meisner, you guys made it happen. Thank you for all you did. If you want to follow the podcast or the blog, head to ronsamazingstories.com. There you will find any of the links I mentioned and how to contact us. Do you want to help the show? The best thing you can do is to tell your friends all about it, and please leave reviews or feedback wherever you listen. Clicking that follow or like button makes us grow. Thank you for listening, and I hope you come again to find out what are Ron's Amazing Stories.